Question number 5. Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by his statement that, quote, ACC is one of many decisions that add up to whether there is a surplus or not a surplus? If so, was the decision to reject officials' advice and keep ACC levies $178 million higher than they need to be a decision made to achieve a surplus?
Honourable Bill English.
Speaker, yes and no.
Supplementary question,
Grant Robertson.
In reference to the last part of that answer, why did then ACC Minister Judith Collins say to Cabinet that, quote, reductions to ACC levies impact on the government's fiscal strategy to balance the books, end quote, if the government's long-promised surplus was not the reason that levies have been kept higher than they need to be?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, because in making that decision, the government takes into account a range of considerations, just in the same ways that it has to weigh up, for instance, the impact on the deficit of providing an increase in operational funding for our schools or more money for our hospitals. Because if you pass the money to the hospital, you have a bigger deficit and it makes it harder to get to surplus. And ACC is no different. Generally, the government has taken a more conservative view than officials about increases and decreases in the levy.
Supplementary question, Jami-Lee.
What benefits will New Zealanders receive in the next few months as a result of this government's improved management of ACC?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the main benefit they will have is the security of knowing that the ACC scheme has now been stabilised after the mess it was left in by the previous Labor government with multi-billion-dollar losses. As we announced in Budget 2014, ACC's improving performance has meant that annual levies for households and businesses have fallen by close to $1 billion per annum since 2011-12, and in addition we've indicated further levy reductions of $480 million in 2015-16. By then we will have reduced ACC levies by almost $1.5 billion per annum, actually bigger than a small tax cut.
That's very good.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why did then ACC Minister Judith Collins defend the inflated ACC levies by saying, quote, because we need to get to surplus. We believe surplus is something very important, unquote. If the reason for making New Zealand workers pay $60 more than they need to and businesses $1,500 more than they need to is simply a way of trying to reach his long-promised surplus.
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, of course the decisions about the ACC levies have an impact on the surplus, and the member seems surprised that that's been referred to. In the same way as increases in the health budget have an impact on the surplus. Part of the job of any government, as it was for the previous Labor government, is to make the decisions about where you can make progress, in the case of ACC, $1.5 billion in levy reductions, at the same time as achieve surpluses. Just in the same way we try and manage the health system with relatively small increases because we want better health services and we want a surplus. And at the moment we're getting both.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
When he said that the national government would post, quote, a meaningful surplus, does he think New Zealanders would expect that to be the result of competently managing and growing the economy rather than ripping off workers and businesses with hiked up ACC levies?
Well, Mr Speaker,
Bill English.
It's not the right day for the Labor Party to be talking about ripping off the workers. I mean, at least the workers paid some levy, whereas Andrew Little didn't pay any of the bill.
Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Does the Minister find it ironic to face accusations of divergent objectives and political meddling in ACC when it was they who removed competition, renationalised it and created the whole situation in the first place 15 years ago?
Insofar as this ministerial responsibility. Order!
Well, Mr Speaker, what the government is responsible for is not the past policies of the Labor Party, but for fixing up the tragic consequences of those policies, which were an unstable ACC system in 2008, losing billions of dollars. It's now performing so well that we're on track to cut levies by $1.5 billion. And for example, all those older people who have a car which they register every year will find that the cost of registering a car drops by $130 from 1 April this year.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Doesn't he think that reaching a surplus in May by unnecessarily hiking ACC levies that will see businesses paying $1,500 a year more than they need to actually breaks his promise to deliver a meaningful surplus, given that it is nothing more than a desperate attempt to rescue the government from yet another dismal deficit?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, I don't agree with any of that. Businesses and I think a lot of the New Zealanders with an interest in ACC are pleased. They've got a stable, sustainable scheme. It's rehabilitating more people more quickly than ever, and as a result of good stewardship by the ACC board and the respective ministers, that they can now drop levies to the point where car registration costs will drop by $130 a year.
Question number 6, Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Community and Voluntary Sector and asks, does she stand by her statement, "You and your charities are core in our life of caring and sharing and drive